Chapter 1. I'm Huckleberry Finn. My name's Huckleberry Finn, or Huck to my friends, and I come from St. Petersburg, a town on the Mississippi River. This is a story about me and my adventures on a raft down the river. There's another story too, called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer's my friend, and we have great fun together. At the end of the story with Tom, we find some money in a cave. It's a lot of money, $12,000. That's $6,000 each. But Judge Thatcher takes our money and puts it in the bank. Now we get interest on our money, $1 a day each, more than we know what to do with. My mother is dead, and I don't know where my father is, but I'm a happy boy. I sometimes wear rags, and I like living in a barrel by the river, but everyone says I can't do that anymore. So I go to live with a nice old woman called Widow Douglas in her big house. She wants me to be her son, and she wants me to be a nice, clean boy. So I sleep in a bed, and I wear nice clothes. She reads me stories, and I eat at the table, but sometimes I really miss my old life. All I really want to do is wear my old rags and sleep in my barrel. But my friend, Tom Sawyer, says I have to be good. Then her sister, Miss Watson, comes to live with us too. She's tall and thin, and she wears glasses. She always shouts at me and tells me what to do. Don't put your feet on the table, Huckleberry. And sit nicely at the table, Huckleberry. I don't like Miss Watson very much. She always says prayers before dinner. Miss Watson has a black slave. He's a big, strong man called Jim. I like Jim. One night, I'm in my bedroom looking out of the window. I hear a noise. I jump out of the window and see Tom Sawyer. We run along the path. Then we see Jim sitting by the kitchen door. He gets up and shouts, "Who's there?" We don't move. Tom and I wait, and then Jim falls asleep with his hat on. Then we run to the top of the hill and find Joe Harper and Ben Rogers and some more boys. We have some great adventures that night. Tom wants us to be a band of robbers and call it Tom Sawyer's Gang. We all promise never to tell anyone our secrets. I go back to my bedroom exhausted, my clothes all dirty. Miss Watson is very angry with me the next morning, but Widow Douglas isn't. She cleans my clothes and doesn't say a word. I'm worried about my pap. That's what I call my father. I don't know where he is. Some people say he drowned in the river, but I don't think so. But I continue going to school. I learn to read and write. At first I hate school, but slowly I start to like it. I even like living with Widow Douglas too. One winter day, after breakfast, I go into the garden and I see some footprints in the snow. I look around, but I don't see anybody. But I know it's him, my pap. So I go to Jim because he has a magic ball. I tell him Pap is here again. What does he want to do? And does he want to stay? I ask Jim. He looks at his ball and says something. He listens to it. Then he says, "Your father doesn't know what to do?" But that night, when I go to my bedroom, there he is. Pap is back. I stare at him. His hair is long and dirty. He's wearing rags. His face is white. "Look at your new clothes," he says. "They're from Widow Douglas," I reply. "You go to school. Do you think you're better than your father?" he continues. "No," I reply, "but I'm learning to read." "Well, I can't read and you don't need to read. I hear you have money. I need money. I haven't got any money. Judge Thatcher has got it. Here, I only have $1, I say, giving him the coin. Then he goes. The next day he goes to Judge Thatcher, but he doesn't get my money. Judge Thatcher and Widow Douglas try to stop Pap from taking me away, but there's nothing they can do. He stays around, he gets drunk. I go to school. Then one day he takes me up the river in a boat. After about 3 miles we stop. There's a wood, but no houses, only a log cabin. We live there. He locks the door at night and he has a gun. We fish and sometimes he goes to town, but he always locks me in the cabin. 2 months pass. I have no books and my clothes are dirty and like rags again. I like the cabin. I think about Widow Douglas's house. I like fishing in the river and living in the forest, but Pap beats me and I have lots of bruises. Then he goes away for 3 days and locks me in the cabin. I'm very lonely. I'm scared zero, so I decide to escape. There isn't a window and the door is locked, but one day I find an old saw, so I start to make a hole in the cabin wall. Then Pap comes back, so I hide it under a blanket. Pap is angry and talks and talks. Then he drinks some whiskey and falls asleep. The next morning, Pap sends me out to get fish for breakfast. I see a canoe on the river. There's nobody inside. I look around. Pap is in the cabin. So I jump in the canoe and hide it. That night, Pap goes out, but he leaves the gun. I take the saw and finish the hole in the wall. I take some food and other things and get out. I have a plan. I find a pig and kill it. Then I put its blood around the cabin. Pap must think I'm dead. Then I get in the canoe and go down the river. Chapter 2. Island Adventures. As I go down the river, I make a plan. I decide to go to Jackson's Island. I know it quite well and nobody ever goes there. When I get to the island, I fall asleep on the riverbank. When I wake up, the sun is high in the sky. I'm comfortable on the grass. Then I hear a loud noise, a boom. I sit up and listen. I get up and look through the trees. I see the ferry boat on the river. There are a lot of people on it. There's another boom, and I see smoke. They are firing the cannon, trying to find my body. When the boat comes close, I see Pap, Judge Thatcher, Tom Sawyer, and his Aunt Polly. I hear them talking about my murder. The boat goes to the other end of the island. I watch it go past, then go back to the town. I'm safe now. Then I make a tent with my blankets. I go fishing. Then, when it's dark, I make my campfire and have supper. I go to bed happy. I live like this for 3 days and 3 nights. Then, on the 4th day, I go exploring around the island. I find strawberries, grapes, and other fruit. Then I go into the woods. I have my gun. I see a campfire. There's smoke. I'm scared. I run back to my camp and climb a tree. I stay up there for about 2 hours, but I don't see anybody or hear anything. I don't sleep much that night, so I decide to explore some more. I take my gun with me and go into the woods. I find the campfire again, and this time there's a man asleep on the ground. There's a blanket over his head. I watch him until the sun comes up. Then the man wakes up and I see his face. It's Jim. Miss Watson's slave. I'm so happy to see him. I shout, "Hello, Jim." He stares at me, then he falls to his knees and says, "Don't hurt me." Jim thinks I'm a ghost. "No, Jim, I'm not dead," I say. "I'm alive." I tell him the story. Then I catch some fish, and we have breakfast. "Why are you here?" I ask Jim. "Please don't tell anybody," he says. "I escaped too." "Why?" I ask. "Because Miss Watson wants to sell me. I'm scared," he says. I swam across the river and hid on the island. We talk and talk for a long time. Jim knows lots of things. Jim sees some birds flying low in the sky and says, "The birds know the weather is changing. Let's find a dry place to camp." So we go to the place I know in the middle of the island. We climb the hill and find a cave. It's a big cave. Jim can stand up in it. It's cool too. We put the canoe in a safe place and we put the blankets on the ground. Then we make dinner. The sky is dark now. It starts to rain. Then there's a storm. Jim is right about the birds. We watch the storm and have dinner. It's very windy and it rains and rains. It's a bad storm, but I'm happy and comfortable in the cave with Jim. The storm continues for 10 or 12 days. The river gets bigger and bigger until it comes over the bank. There's water on the island, so sometimes we take the canoe to get around. We see rabbits and snakes and turtles. One day we see a raft. We catch it and put it in a tree. Then another night, a wooden house comes down the river. We go up to it, but we can't see anything. It's too dark. So we wait in the canoe till morning. When the sun comes up, we go back to the house. We look in the window. There's a bed, a table, and 2 old chairs. There are lots of things on the floor. There are some clothes too. Then we see something in the corner. It's a man. "Hello," Jim shouts. The man doesn't move. I shout too, but there's no answer. "The man's dead," Jim says. "Stay here and let me see." Jim goes to the man. "There's a bullet in his back," he says. Jim puts a blanket over the man. "Don't look," he says. "It isn't nice." I don't want to look. We find some things in the house. Some clothes, a knife, some candles, some blankets, some medicine, and some money, and we take them all and put them in the canoe. Then we go back to our cave. After breakfast the next day, I ask Jim about the dead man, but Jim doesn't want to talk. He says it's bad luck. He says the dead man can haunt us. So I don't say any more. The days go by and the river goes back to normal. We fish again and hunt rabbits. Then I decide to go over the river and see what's happening in town. Jim says to go at night and to dress as a girl because people think I'm dead. I think this is a good idea. So I get one of the dresses from the house and put on a sun hat. Jim says I look like a girl. Nobody can see your huckleberry fin, he says. I practice walking like a girl for a few hours. Then I get in the canoe when it's dark. I go across the river to the town. I see a light in a house by the river. I look in the window. There's a woman knitting by candlelight. I don't know her face. I knock on the door. "Come in," says the woman. "What's your name?" she asks. "Sarah Williams," I reply. "And where do you live?" she asks. "In Hookerville. I came here on foot, and I'm tired now." "Let me find you something to eat," she says. We sit and talk. "I don't know many people here," she says. "We came here 2 weeks ago." Then she talks about my pap and the murder. She talks about Tom Sawyer too. She says people think Jim the slave is my murderer. "He ran away the night of Huckleberry Finn's murder," she says, "so everyone thinks it's him. There's a reward now, $300, for the person who finds him. And there's a reward for Finn, too, $200. Everyone thinks the man is around here somewhere." "Really?" I say. "Yes, and I think he's on that island, Jackson Island. I see smoke over there some days, so my husband's going over tonight to see. I'm scared now. I want to tell Jim." Then she says, "What's your name?" "Mary Williams," I reply. She looks at me and continues talking. "Come on, what's your real name?" I stare at her. "Tell me your secret," she says. So I tell her my mother and father are dead. I make up a story. "I'm going to Goshen," I say. So she makes me some food and I leave her house. I jump in the canoe and go back to the island. "Get up, Jim," I shout. "They're coming for you." Jim jumps up and we quickly put everything on the raft. Then we start down the river. Chapter 3. A Meeting with a King. We go slowly down the river in the night. When the sun comes up the next morning, we leave the canoe by the riverbank and cover it with branches. We sit on the riverbank and watch the rafts and steamboats go up and down the river all day, and we talk and talk. Every night we get in the canoe and go a little more down the river. We fish and talk. Sometimes we swim in the river and sometimes we look at the stars. Every night we pass towns. Sometimes we stop at the town and I find a chicken or something else to eat. On the 5th night, We pass St. Louis. There are lots of lights, but everybody is asleep. One night there's a big storm and we see a steamboat stuck on the rocks. I want to go and look inside, but Jim says no. There are things inside we can take, I tell Jim. Let's go and see. I want an adventure. Jim thinks for a minute, then says it's all right to go. So we get on the steamboat. But on the steamboat we hear people speaking. Jim is scared. He goes back to the canoe, but I stay. I want to see what's happening, just like Tom Sawyer. I see a man on the floor and two men standing over him. One has a gun. I listen. Then I get scared too and go back to Jim. We go down the river, but soon there's another storm. We pass more towns and have lots more adventures. Jim and I stay many days on the river, fishing and talking. We talk about everything, about kings and princes, speaking French and saying silly things. We go to Cairo, where the Ohio River comes in. We decide to sell the canoe and get a steamboat to make things easier for us. But the fog comes down and we can't see anything. One day a strong current takes us away from each other and I can't find Jim anywhere. The next morning Jim is back and we have even more adventures. We continue down the river, but we never get to Cairo, so we cook fish, swim in the river and watch the stars. Then one day everything changes. One morning I am looking for some fruit when I see two men running towards me. "Help! Help!" they say. "Some men and dogs are chasing us." "Jump on the raft with me so the dogs can't find you," I tell them. We wait. Then we hear some men and dogs running by. They don't see us. We go up the river. Everything is quiet. We're safe now. One of the men is about 70 years old. He's bald and has a grey beard, a hat and a stick. The other man is about 30 years old and is well dressed. They have breakfast with us and we talk. We don't think they know each other. Jim and I listen to their stories and adventures. Then the young one says, "I must tell you that I'm really a duke." We're amazed when we hear this. "Really?" says the old man. "Yes," says the young man. "My great-grandfather was the eldest son of the Duke of Bridgewater, so I'm now the Duke of Bridgewater. But here I'm lost, tired, and hunted by men." Jim feels sad for him, and so do I. We want to help him. He tells us that we must speak to him in a special way and call him Your Grace or Bridgewater. Then he says one of us has to serve him dinner. So that's easy, we think. But the old man is silent. After some time he says, "Look, Bridgewater, you aren't the only person to have troubles like that." "Ah, no?" he replies. "No, you aren't. I'm the King of France," he cries. Jim and I look at the old man. We're even more surprised. He says, "Call me Your Majesty." So we do, and we give him his meals first and help him with everything. But the Duke isn't very happy. Sometime later, I realize that the Duke and King are just fraudsters, but I don't say anything. They are on the run like me and Jim. They ask us lots of questions, so I make up stories because I don't want to tell them the truth. We travel down the river together at night. The King and the Duke whisper to each other. I know they are planning how to cheat money out of people. In each new town, they do something different. In one town, the king preaches to people in a church and tells them about some bad people who robbed him. They believe him when he starts crying and give him some money. Later, we count the money. There are $87.75. One day, they make a poster. There's a picture of a runaway slave and $200 reward in words. The description of the slave is just like Jim. The Duke says this way we can run during the daytime too. We think it's a good idea. In another town, they plan a show. The Duke takes people's money at the door, and when the curtain goes up, the king comes onto the stage in a strange costume. He jumps around doing something from Shakespeare and then runs off. When the crowd realizes the men are fraudsters, they're very angry. We run back to the raft. The king and the duke count their money and laugh. The next day, the king and the duke talk about new ideas to make money, but they can't think of a good plan. So the king decides to go into town. He tells me to put on my new clothes and take him to the steamboat. We get in the canoe and go down the river. After some time, we meet a young man sitting by the river. "Where are you going, young man?" asks the king. "I'm getting the steamboat to New Orleans," he replies. "Come with us. We're going too. My servant, Adolphus, can help you with your bags," he says, looking at me. They talk as we go down the river. "Are you Mr. Wilkes?" asks the young man. "No, my name's Blodgett." "Reverend Alexander Blodgett," says the king. "I hope Mr. Wilkes comes soon." "Yes, because you see his brother Peter is dead. We hope Harvey comes for Peter's funeral." "And then there's his brother William," he continues. "He's deaf and dumb. About 30 he is. There's another brother too, George. He and his wife are dead. Harvey and William are the only ones left. Then there are George's daughters, Mary Jane, the red-headed one. She's a kind girl. You see, there's a letter for Harvey telling him where Peter's money is and who he wants to give his property to." "Where does Harvey live?" asks the king, suddenly interested in the man's story. "In England," he replies. "And is Peter Wilkes a wealthy man?" the king continues. "Oh, yes, quite wealthy. He has houses and land, and about $3,000 or $4,000. The funeral's tomorrow." "Well, it's a really sad story," says the king as the young man gets on the steamboat. We don't get on. "Go back and get the duke," the king tells me. I know what his plan is now. Chapter 4. Brothers. When I get back to the Duke, the king tells him everything, every last word. "Can you play deaf and dumb?" he asks the Duke. This is his plan. He wants everyone to believe he's Harvey Wilkes and the Duke is William Wilkes. So we get on a steamboat and go to Peter Wilkes's village. When we get off the boat, a group of men come to us. "Can anyone tell me where Mr. Peter Wilkes lives?" the king asks them in a perfect English accent. They look at each other and nod their heads. Then one of them says, "I'm sorry, sir, but I can only tell you where his house is." "Oh no," says the king, "our poor brother is dead." He turns to the Duke and makes a lot of strange signs with his hands. Then they both start crying. The men are sad for them. Then they carry their bags up the hill to Peter Wilkes's house and tell them about their brother's last moments. Then the king says it all over again with his hands to his brother, the Duke. It's the best show ever, but I am ashamed and I can't look at them. Soon everyone in the village knows that Peter Wilkes is in the village. "Is it them?" we hear them saying to each other. "Oh yes, it is," someone else answers. When we get to Peter Wilkes' house, there's a crowd of people outside, and the three girls are standing at the door. Mary has red hair and is very beautiful. When the girls see their uncles, they're very happy and hug them. Then the king sees the coffin in the house, and he and the Duke walk solemnly to it. Everybody is quiet now as they watch the two men. As they look at the coffin, the king and the Duke start crying. They put their arms around each other. Then they put their heads on the coffin and say a prayer. When they do this, everybody starts crying. It's such an amazing show. Then the king speaks. He thanks everybody for their kind words and says how hard it is to lose his brother. Then he starts crying again. Later, Mary brings the king a letter. The king reads it aloud and cries at the same time. "My dear brother leaves this house and $3,000 in gold to his nieces. He leaves his other property and $3,000 in gold to William and me," says the king. He says that the money is in a bag in the cellar. Let's go and find it now. The Duke goes with the king into the cellar. "Bring a candle," the king tells me. We go into the cellar and close the door. "We're so lucky," the king says, laughing. We find the bag of money and they count it, but there is $415 missing. "Where's that money?" says the king. He thinks for a moment, then says, "Let's add our money to it and make it 6,000. So they do. They take money out of their pockets and put it in the bag. "I've got an idea," says the Duke. "Let's give all the money to the girls. We can get it back later." "That's a fantastic idea," says the king. So they go upstairs and give the bag the girls. Then he speaks to everyone. "My friends, my poor brother is a generous man. He loved and cared for these 3 poor orphaned girls, so we want to give all the money to our nieces. Here, Mary Jane, Susan, Joanna, take all the money. It's yours." The girls are so happy. They hug their uncles. Everybody in the room has tears in their eyes. But there's one person who doesn't. He just stands and listens. He doesn't say anything. Then he laughs and says, "So you're Peter Wilkes' brother? You talk like an Englishman, but it's a very bad accent. You're a fraudster." Everybody in the room stops and stares. The people in the room try to tell the man to be quiet. They say that they're Harvey and William Wilkes, but the man doesn't stop. He says to the girls, "I was your father's friend, I was his doctor, and I'm your friend. I want to help you. This man is a fraudster." But Mary Jane looks at the man and says, "Here's my answer." She shows him the bag of money. Then she looks at the king and says, "Take these $6,000 and invest them for me and my sisters. I want no receipt." Then the girls put their arms around the king and smile. Everybody in the room claps. The doctor says, "All right, you do as you want, but remember this day." Then he leaves the house. Later, Mary Jane gives the king and the duke bedrooms, and they all have dinner together. Even I get a small room to sleep in, but I feel bad for the girls. In bed that night, I think about what to do. Maybe I can go to the doctor and tell him about the fraudsters. But no. What if he tells everyone about me? What if I tell Mary Jane? No. I decide to take the money, hide it, and then write a letter to Mary Jane, telling her where it is. That's a good idea, so I go quietly to the Duke's room and look around. There's nothing there. Then I go to the King's room, but suddenly the King and Duke come into the room. I quickly hide behind the curtains. They talk about their plans. The Duke wants to leave that night, but the King wants to stay and get the property too. The Duke agrees to stay. Just before they go downstairs, the Duke says, "I don't think the money is in a good place." "You're right," says the King. He takes the bag of money from its hiding place and puts it under the mattress. They leave the room and I quickly take the bag. Then I hide it in my bedroom. When everyone is in bed later, I leave my room and go downstairs. But the front door is locked and there's no key. Then I hear someone coming down the stairs. The only place to hide the bag is in Peter Wilkes' open coffin. His hands are cold as I put the bag inside. Then I hide behind the door. Just then, Mary Jane comes into the room. She goes to the coffin and looks inside. She starts crying, and I go quietly back to bed. The next day, lots of people sit around the coffin before the funeral. I can't see the bag. After the funeral, they close the coffin and bury Peter Wilkes. I don't know what to do. That evening, the King tells everyone that he has to go back to England and he wants to quickly sell the property. I want to take the girls to England with me, he says. The girls are happy. The day after the funeral, the king sells the slaves. The sons go to Memphis, and the mother goes to New Orleans. Everyone is sad. The next morning, the king asks me, "Did you go into my room the other night?" "No," I reply, "but the slaves are often in there." "So it's them," he shouts. "Let's sell everything quickly." Before the auction, I tell Mary Jane all about the bad story. I tell her where the money is. Later, a steamboat comes and 2 men get off. An old man and a younger one. "I'm Harvey Wilkes," the older man says in a perfect English accent. "And this is my brother, William." The king laughs and says, "They're fraudsters." Everybody in the crowd agrees, except the doctor and 2 other men, the lawyer Levi Bell, and a big, rough-looking man. Chapter 5. Rescuing Jim. Everybody stares at the 2 men. The king and the duke don't show any surprise. Then the big man says to the king, "So you're Harvey Wilkes? Tell me about your journey here." The king tells him about his journey on the steamboat the day before the funeral. The man listens, then tells everyone how he remembers seeing the king in a canoe with Tim Collins and a boy. "Do you know the boy?" asks the doctor. "Yes," says the man, pointing at me. "There he is." "Well," says the doctor, "if these 2 aren't fraudsters, then I'm an idiot. Let's take them to the tavern and find out." So they take us all to the hotel in the village. "Where's the money?" asks the doctor. "I put it in a safe place for my nieces," says the king, "but I'm sure the slaves have it now." Nobody believes him, and they continue to ask us lots of questions. Then they ask the king to write a few words on a piece of paper, but nobody can read it. The lawyer examines the writing and takes out some old letters. "This isn't Harvey Wilkes' writing," he says. Then the real Harvey Wilkes says to the king, "If you're Harvey Wilkes, prove it. Tell me about the tattoo on my brother's chest." The king thinks for a while, then replies, "It's a small, thin blue arrow." "That's what it is." "Did you hear him?" shouts the real Harvey Wilkes. "He's wrong. I know the correct answer. The real tattoo is the letters PBW. Nobody says anything. They don't know who to believe. Then the lawyer says, "Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's go and dig up the body." So everybody goes to the graveyard. I'm really scared now. The big man holds on to my hand so I can't get away. It's dark and it starts to rain, but the men dig and dig. At last they get the coffin and open it. Somebody shouts, "Here's the bag of money." The big man goes to look, and I run and run. I run fast down the road. I get into a canoe and go down the river until I find the raft and Jim. "Let's go, Jim," I shout. He's so happy to see me. But then I see the king and the duke. "Are you running away from us?" the king shouts as he gets onto the raft. He's very angry. We don't stop at any towns for days and days. When they think we're safe, the king and the duke start playing their games again, tricking people out of their money. One day I see them talking quietly. Jim and I are worried now. The next day we stop at a village called Pikesville. The king goes to the village and tells us to stay on the raft and wait for him. At midday, the Duke and I go to find him. He's in a bar and he's very drunk. The Duke is very angry with him. They start fighting, so I run back to the raft and shout, "Jim, let's go." But Jim isn't there. I run into the woods, but Jim isn't there. I see a boy and I ask him about Jim. "Yes, he's down at Silas Phelps' place," the boy says, "and an old man has $40 more in his pocket." Now I know the king's new trick. So the next day, I go down the river in the canoe to Silas Phelps's place. I walk along the road. It's a sunny day. As I am climbing over the fence, 2 dogs run up to me. After a few minutes, there are about 15 dogs around me. A servant and some children run out of the house along with a white woman of about 45. She looks at me and shouts, "Ah, it's you at last." "Yes," I reply. "It's Tom Sawyer." "He's back," says the woman. "Tom Sawyer?" She thinks I'm Tom Sawyer. This is Tom's Aunt Sally. She takes me into the house and tells me her husband, Tom's Uncle Silas, is looking for Tom. "Here he comes," she says. "Let's play a joke on him. Stay here." An old man comes into the house. "Is he with you?" she asks. "No," says the man. "I'm so worried. Where is he?" Then she tells me to come out of my hiding place. "Here he is," she shouts. "It's Tom Sawyer." They both start laughing and dancing, and we talk about Tom's family for hours. It's good to be Tom Sawyer. I'm happy. But I think maybe Tom is coming back on a steamboat right now. I must stop him before they find out I'm Huck Finn. "Aunt Sally," I say, "my bag is in town. I need to go and get it." So I take the wagon, but along the road I see another wagon. It's Tom Sawyer. When he sees me, he says, "Huck, why are you here to haunt me?" He's scared. "No," I say, "I'm not a ghost. I'm not dead." "I don't understand," he says. "I'm not dead," I tell him. "It's just a trick." He's happy to see me. I tell him I want to rescue Jim. "I can help you get him back," he says. We make a plan and he puts his bag in my wagon. I drive quickly back to Silas' place. After some time, Tom comes to the farm. He's wearing old clothes and he tells them he is Sid Sawyer, my brother. "Tom and I wanted to surprise you," he tells his aunt and uncle. After dinner, Tom and I go to bed in the same room. When everyone is asleep, we climb out of the window. "I think I know where Jim is," Tom says. "In the hut in the garden." We go to the hut and look in the little window. There's lots of farm equipment inside, but we can't see anything else. "I think he's in here," says Tom. "We can dig a tunnel to get him out." That's the plan. The next morning, we see one of the servants with some food. "Is that for the dogs?" asks Tom. "Yes, for the dog." "Do you want to see him?" says the servant. We go into the hut and Jim is there. "Why, Huck," he shouts. "Do you know this man?" the servant asks me. "Why do you think that?" asks Tom. "He speaks like he knows your friend," the servant replies. "No?" says Tom. "I think you're wrong." That night, we start digging. It takes us 2 nights until we come up under Jim's bed. He's so happy to see us, he cries. We tell Jim to wait another day or 2, and then we go back to our bedroom. Later that night, Tom and I make a plan. I can write an anonymous letter to Uncle Silas and tell him that someone's planning to steal the slave, says Tom. "Why?" I ask. "So the adventure is more exciting," he says. The next night, we go to get Jim. "Come on, let's go," Tom says, and we run. Suddenly, a man shouts, "He's gone!" We run and run. Some men fire their guns at us. "You're free, Jim," we say. "I've got a bullet in my leg," says Tom. He's bleeding. Chapter 6. Freedom. Jim and I are worried. "We need to get a doctor," says Jim. No, says Tom. "No," I say. "You need to see a doctor. Jim can hide in the woods when the doctor comes." I find the doctor. He's an old man, a very nice old man. I tell him a story and say my brother needs help. "Who are your folks?" he asks. "The Phelps," I tell him. So he gets his lantern and follows me to the canoe. He frowns and says, "This is too small for 2 people. I need to go on my own. Wait here." So I sit down and fall asleep. When I wake up, the sun is shining. I run to the doctor's house, but he isn't there. Then I meet Uncle Silas. "Tom," he shouts, "your aunt is worried. Come here." "Sorry, Uncle Silas," I say. "Sid and I like playing. There are some men and dogs down there. We like going in the canoe. Things like that, you know. Sid's at the post office now." So we go to the post office together, but of course Sid isn't there. We wait some time. Then Uncle Silas says, "Let's go home and see Aunt Sally." When we get home, Aunt Sally is so happy to see me. She laughs and cries and hugs me. The house is full of farmers' wives. They talk and talk about the runaway slave and the thieves. "And where's Sid?" asks Aunt Sally. "I can run to town and get him," I say. No, Aunt Sally replies. "You stay right here. I don't want to lose you too. Your uncle can go if Sid isn't here for supper." Supper time comes, and there's no Sid, so Uncle Silas goes looking for him. But Uncle Silas comes back at about 10. He can't find Tom. Aunt Sally is very worried now. "Don't worry, boys are boys," he says. I go to bed, and Aunt Sally gets me a candle and tucks me in. It's nice to be mothered, I think. She talks to me for a long time about Sid, saying what a good boy he is and asking me if I think he is lost or drowned. "The door isn't locked, but be good, Tom," she says to me before she leaves the bedroom. "Don't go anywhere. I really want to go and see where Tom is, but I don't want to upset Aunt Sally anymore, so I stay in bed. I don't sleep very well that night, and the next morning Uncle Silas is in town before breakfast. But he can't find Tom anywhere. At breakfast, they're sad. Then Uncle Silas says to Aunt Sally, 'There's a letter here from the post office.' He gives the letter to Aunt Sally. It's from St. Petersburg. 'It's from my sister,' she says. I'm worried now. What does the letter say?" She's opening the letter when we hear a noise. We look out of the window and see Tom Sawyer. She drops the letter on the floor. He's on a mattress, and there's the old doctor and Jim and lots of people. Jim's hands are tied behind his back. I quickly pick up the letter and hide it. Then I run outside with Aunt Sally and Uncle Silas. "He's dead, he's dead, I know he's dead," Aunt Sally shouts. Just then, Tom moves his head a little and says something. "Oh, thank God," shouts Aunt Sally. "He's alive." Then she kisses him and runs into the house to make him a bed. The doctor and Uncle Silas go into the house, but I stay outside. There are lots of men around Jim, and they're arguing about what to do with him. "Hang him," one shouts. "Yes, that's right," another says. "That's a lesson for the other slaves around here. They mustn't run away like this one." "No," says another. "That's not the answer. He isn't our slave." So they continue arguing and beat Jim too. Jim doesn't say anything. Then they take him to the hut in the garden and tie him up again. The doctor comes out of the house and says, "Don't hurt him. He isn't a bad person. He's a very helpful man, especially with the boy. I think he's a good man, gentlemen." Everyone is silent for a moment. Then someone says, "Well, I like what I hear, Doctor, I must say." The others nod their heads in agreement. I want to thank the doctor for his words. The next morning, Tom is much better. I go into his room, but he's sleeping. Aunt Sally is still in the room too, so I sit down and wait for him to wake up. After some time, he opens his eyes. "Hello," he says. "I'm home. Where's Jim?" "He's all right," I say. "Does Aunt Sally know?" he asks. "About what, Sid?" asks Aunt Sally. "That Jim is a free man," says Tom. "What's he talking about?" Aunt Sally asks. "Is he ill again?" "No, I'm not ill, Aunt. I know what I'm talking about," Tom says. Then he tells her all the story. "Goodness me," says Aunt Sally. "You're very naughty boys. You make everyone frightened with your silly games. Well, I don't want you to have anything to do with him again." "Who with?" asks Tom. "With the slave, of course," says Aunt Sally. "But isn't he free?" asks Tom. "No," says Aunt Sally. "He's back in the hut eating bread and water and tied up." and he's staying there till we sell him." "No," shouts Tom. "He isn't a slave. Free him." "What does the child mean?" asks Aunt Sally. "I mean every word, Aunt Sally," he says. "Miss Watson died 2 months ago, and it's in her will that Jim is a free man now." "So you and Tom rescued a free man?" she says. "Yes, because I love a good adventure," he replies. Then he shouts, "Aunt Polly!" Aunt Sally jumps up and hugs her sister. They cry and talk, and I quickly hide under the bed. Then Aunt Polly looks at Tom and says, "Yes, look away, Tom." "That's Sid, not Tom," says Aunt Sally. "Tom is here somewhere." "Where is he?" "Tom? You mean, where's Huck Finn?" says Aunt Polly. "I know who Tom is, and Huck Finn is under the bed. Come on out, Huck." So I come out. Aunt Sally is confused. Then Uncle Silas comes into the room, and they tell him the story, and Aunt Polly tells them who I am. "I write letters to you," she says to her sister, "but there are no answers from you." "But there are no letters here," says Aunt Sally. Then Aunt Polly looks at Tom. "Give me the letters, Tom," she says. "They're in the trunk," he says. "I never look at them. I promise." I don't say anything. They untie Jim quickly, and when Aunt Polly, Aunt Sally, and Uncle Silas hear how helpful he is, they're very kind to him. They give him all he wants to eat, and Tom gives him $40 for being so patient. Jim is very happy. Then Tom talks about having more adventures together. I say that's fine by me. But I have no money. I think he has all my money now. "No," says Jim. "He hasn't got your money. It's all there. All $6,000 and more." I look at Jim. I don't understand. "He ain't coming back, Huck," Jim says. "Why, Jim?" I ask. "Do you remember that house on the river and the dead man inside?" "Well, that was him, your father," Jim says, putting his hands on my shoulders. I stare at Jim. Pap is dead. So that's the end of the story. Tom is better now. He wears the bullet from his leg around his neck. Aunt Sally and Uncle Silas want to adopt me, but that isn't for me. I'm leaving soon.